Hello and welcome to a special bonus edition of the Total Soccer Show. If you were looking for a Game of Thrones 11 show, don't worry, that's coming out later. Check your feed later today. This episode is an interview with Nathan Carr. Nathan Carr is an English writer and podcaster. He runs the website thehomeofcaribbeanfootball.com and Caribbean Football Weekly. He's over here in the US right now following the Gold Cup and specifically following Jamaica, Curacao, French Guiana, and, importantly to us, Martinique. That's the US's opponent on Wednesday evening. So I called up Nathan to talk about how he got into Caribbean football, what we should know about Martinique, and also to catch up on some other stories surrounding the Caribbean teams at this tournament. For example, did you know about the Florent Malouda thing? You know, the former Chelsea and France winger who was supposed to be playing for French Guiana but found out at the last minute that he could not play. We get into that. We get into the difficulties that smaller Caribbean nations have in the Gold Cup and just being an international team, especially when you are sort of an overseas department of a bigger nation and the restrictions that puts on your team. If you stick around after the interview, I have a few thoughts on maybe what the US will do or should do or maybe is going to do against Martinique on Wednesday night. But first, let's hear from a man who really knows his Caribbean football. So I'm joined by Nathan Carr. Nathan, thank you for joining me on the Total Soccer Show. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you, Daryl. Thanks for having me on the show.
And listeners may notice that we have similar accents. You are from the mighty West Midlands, the best place in all of England. But you're in Tampa right now, following the Caribbean teams around for the Gold Cup. So my first question is, how and why does a guy from the West Midlands end up sort of having a website about Caribbean football and a podcast, Caribbean Football Weekly? How does that happen?
Well, I started kind of following Caribbean football when I was around 15, so 5 years ago, and I began researching into the Caribbean and quickly became, fascinated really by the exotic nature of all the islands and the diversity of the region, because the Caribbean is so diverse, and the potential for football, the Caribbean definitely has. So I decided to create my blog, The Home of Caribbean Football. And, and just last year, actually, set up the podcast Caribbean Football Weekly, which you mentioned there, with a couple of guys, Simon and Santoki, that I knew from Twitter. And, really enjoy covering it. I think the interest has picked up over the last few years or so. As I say, I'm in the States at the moment to cover some of the Gold Cup matches, and I was in Martinique last month to report on the Caribbean Cup, which Curacao won their first title. So I think Caribbean football still has a lot of work to do in terms of development, and certainly in kind of a global context, it's far behind. Even within CONCACAF, a lot of Caribbean teams struggle. But it's a really fascinating, often misunderstood part of the world, I think. And as I say, I think there's lots of potential for growth in terms of football.
How do people back home react when you start talking about sort of Martinique and French Guiana? Because I know when I go back to the Midlands and I say anything about the US national team, like people don't know who a lot of these players are. And they think it's weird that I'm just not like people only want to talk about the Premier League and maybe the England team, and that's pretty much it, right? So what's the reaction you get?
I think it's a cultural thing in not just England but Britain, really, isn't it? The mainstream kind of English Premier League, English Premier League. I think at first there was a bit of resistance, perhaps, particularly at school. If I kind of, I guess I was in the minority when I'm talking about French Guiana and Aruba and Dominica.
Yeah.
But what I found is if there's like a player that a lot of people are aware of, or a controversial moment or a match which is of kind of a decent magnitude, then people will generally ask questions like Florent Malouda in the Gold Cup, or different rumours that might spread. A Caribbean player might be linked with a transfer away to a European club, and then there's a bit of interest. But generally, Caribbean football, I don't think is talked about much in England. Although that there is a decent Caribbean diaspora,
of course,
across, particularly in places like Huddersfield, London, Manchester, Birmingham. So There are a lot of people that, are second, third generation immigrants who have family from some of the islands,
Okay, so speaking of, I wanted to get you talking about Martinique, because that's who the US is playing. And really, that's like my sudden interest in Caribbean football, is because the US are playing Martinique, right, if I'm being honest. But also, one of the guys you just mentioned, Florent Malouda, former Chelsea player, former France winger, there's a weird story going on where he was named to the French Guiana roster, but then found out he wasn't allowed to play. So I really wanted to ask you about that first. I mean, first of all, I think I understand, but I'd like to ask you to explain to our listeners and to me, how is Florent Malouda, former France international, allowed to even be named to a French Guiana roster? How does that work?
Right, so just a bit of background on this. Florent Malouda, he was born in French Guiana, so that is his country of birth, and he moved to mainland France, or sometimes they call it mainland France, or they call it metropolitan France, which is basically France, when he was younger, to pursue a professional career. And obviously he went on to play for France and won many caps, played in the Euros in 2012 and World Cups.
Yeah.
And just recently, the manager of French Guiana, Jay Karam, he wanted to bring Malouda in, to provide a bit of experience, a bit of world-class quality, really, into the side. And he named him in the squad for the Caribbean Cup. Now, he played in both of those games against Jamaica and Martinique, and there were no problems at all. How it works is there's this thing called the 5-year rule, which is when a player has played for France and they've played competitively for France, they can leave it 5 years, and then they can go and play after that 5-year rule has passed. They can go and play for one of the French overseas departments, because Martinique is a French overseas department, just like Guadeloupe, just like Martinique. Just like Guadeloupe, just like Martinique. And then French Guiana as well.
Got it.
All three of them, are not part of FIFA. They're not affiliated to FIFA. So this is important when talking about this, because French Guiana not being part of FIFA means that the cap tie thing usually doesn't come into play. However, with the Gold Cup, it appears that CONCACAF are using FIFA rules and regulations. And this means that CONCACAF and FIFA combined have said that Malouda, sorry, you cannot play. You're ineligible to play for French Guiana in this tournament because you are down as cap tied to France. The thing is, there was an example, Jocelyn Angloma. I don't know if you remember him.
Yes. I remember him playing in the Gold Cup, right?
Yeah, that's right. In 2007, when Guadeloupe had that fairy tale tournament, reached the semis, and then Angloma, he was I think he was around 40 at the time. He played for France in the 90s. And he'd worked on the 5-year rule. He'd come back to play for Guadeloupe, the country of his birth, and there were no problems. But I think back then CONCACAF were using their own rules and regulations.
Right.
Now Montegliani has said we're using the FIFA rules and regulations, and that's caused the problem. I don't know why it took so long for CONCACAF and the powers that be to make this announcement, because Malouda was named on the 40-man preliminary squad. He was named on the final 23-man squad. And it was only on the eve of the game against Canada last Friday that they actually made this announcement and said, Malouda, you can't play. There was rumours that French Guiana might just play him anyway.
I saw those rumours. They would have forfeited the game, but what, just to kind of prove a point, or to be able to give Canada a good game? What was the thinking there?
Possibly a bit of both, really. I mean, on a footballing level, to give Canada a better game, because Malouda is a fantastic player.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the tricks he was pulling out in the Caribbean Cup, he just mesmerising the crowd. I think just to kind of maybe prove a point as well to CONCACAF and say, we don't want to accept or obey what you're saying, but in the end they had to, because I think they would have forfeited the match 3-0.
Right.
In the end they went on, they lost 4-2. But yeah, generally a bit of a messy situation, and it's a shame actually, because not only for the player, because I know when I spoke to Malouda in the mix zone at the Caribbean Cup, he was really excited to play in the Gold Cup. He was really eager to get out there, but he obviously won't be able to feature. And also, just for the tournament, because Malouda would have been, I think, the Gold Cup's most accomplished player.
Right.
Won the Champions League, won the FA Cup, won the English Premier League with Chelsea. So it would have been, great for the crowd really to see a player of that quality on the pitch, but wasn't to be.
Oh well. And can they replace him on the roster, or do they just have this sort of 23rd space that they can't use now?
I'm not actually too sure. I think they can replace him, but there were 3 absentees actually for the Canada game. It was Malouda was an absentee, Ludovic Bao, who possibly might not have been released by his club, but not 100% on that, and Jules Habot might have been injury related. So I think how it works, isn't it, is if you get into the knockout phase of the tournament, you can switch 6 players, from the 40-man.
All right, so that's a pleasant welcome to CONCACAF for Florent Malouda and some of the disorganisation that takes place here. Martinique, this is not Martinique's first Gold Cup, right? And they're a team that when I saw them joining the US's group, I got to confess, I look at it and I'm just like, okay, that's 3 points. We can beat those guys, right? But then when it rolls around to the game is what, 2 days from now? It's Wednesday evening.
Yeah.
I start thinking about, I should look and see who these guys are. And then I saw the 2-0 win over Nicaragua in the first game. I saw Steven Langille's goal where he sort of does that incredible turn and then accelerates like he's playing a video game and cheating, accelerates away from the Nicaraguan defenders. And I start to think, is this a team that could give the US any trouble? So I really want to talk to you about sort of the background of Martinique, how they got here and what they're all about. You mentioned you were at the Caribbean Cup. Can I assume that is how Martinique qualify for the Gold Cup?
No, so there's a slight kind of subtlety with this. The Caribbean Cup qualifying, it doubles up as Gold Cup qualifying, and Martinique actually booked their ticket to the Gold Cup back in October. So all 4 teams that went to the Caribbean Cup last month, they already had qualified for the Gold Cup, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so through some sort of through the qualification?
Yeah, so there was the first round in March last year, the second round was in June, the third round was in October/November because of Hurricane Matthew that disrupted some of the games. And then, so in last October in the final round, the 4 teams that topped their respective groups, they actually secured their ticket to the Gold Cup. So there were kind of a lot of celebrations for many of the teams. So the Caribbean Cup was really kind of a dress rehearsal. It was a fortnight before the Gold Cup. It was a chance for teams to kind of experiment a little bit.
I see.
And see how they were shaping up ahead of the Gold Cup. But yeah, Martinique, this is actually their 5th Gold Cup appearance. So they played 4 times before. They're back after playing in the 2013 event, where I like the look of them actually. I thought they were a bit unlucky not to advance to the quarters in 2013. They beat Canada. Don't know if you remember that. An amazing long-range strike from Fabrice Ruperne at the very end. But then they lost to Panama and Mexico. It was quite a tough group. They're kind of in Caribbean football circles. I'd say Martinique they're kind of pushing the upper bracket of competition, but they're not quite at the very top. So traditionally, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago and to an extent Haiti are the powerhouses. They kind of dominate things, and Martinique, I'd say, are kind of just underneath that. The Gold Cup for them is huge. It's absolutely huge because, as I said before, they're not part of FIFA. They don't play in World Cup qualifiers. They don't have that opportunity. So
again, this is because they're sort of a French department, right? So they're technically
exactly. And the French Football Federation, it seems, they don't want Martinique, Guadeloupe, French Guiana having FIFA status, right. Because it would mean that players born on the islands would actually play for the islands themselves. But
I see. That's what it's about.
That's why there's a bit of because going off on a bit of a tangent here, but there are a lot of players with Martinique heritage: Thierry Henry, Eric Abidal, Raphael Varane, Nicolas Anelka, Axel Witsel, Anthony Martial, Gael Clichy, Loic Remy. The list goes on and on and on. Right. There are a lot of players born in France that could play for Martinique potentially, but Martinique, because they're not part of FIFA, the Gold Cup is a big opportunity for them, and qualifying actually for the tournament was really straightforward for them. So they played 6 qualifiers altogether, and they won on an aggregate of 17-2. They only conceded to Dominica and the Dominican Republic, and along the way they beat their arch rivals Guadeloupe. So that rivalry has been going on for a long while. They beat them 2-0, which was a big result for them. And amazingly, actually, they beat Trinidad and Tobago, former World Cup participants. They beat them at home in the final round. And Langille and Parsmain, the 2 goal scorers against Nicaragua, they were on the score sheet on that day. And those 2 really are the key attacking players for Martinique. Kevin Parsmain He's been playing with the national team for a long while now, and his goal scoring record is excellent for Martinique. It's really, really good.
He scored the header, right, against Nicaragua,
yeah,
which
that's
was
right.
a really nicely placed header, right in the
yeah,
side.
it was. He kind of just escaped his marker, didn't he? And found the bottom corner, and you could see actually how much that meant to him with the celebration. But his goal scoring record is fantastic. And I think with the domestic season in Martinique, he's just come off a very good season. He scored around 32 goals, I think, in 30-something appearances.
Wow. So he's like the Steve Bull of Martinique.
Yeah, the Steve Bull of Martinique, if you want to say that. I mean, US listeners to the show actually might remember his name, Parsmain, because he was on a pre-season training with Seattle Sounders in MLS. Oh, okay. But he injured himself and eventually he got released. And Stephen Langille, he only made his debut last year, actually, at the beginning of qualifying for Caribbean Cup and Gold Cup. So
I looked at his sort of resume, and he's 29, and he's played in the Belgian top flight. And I wondered sort of why. And that goal, didn't he come off the bench and score within about a minute?
Pretty much, yeah. It was a great impact.
So, how is he so late coming to international football with Martinique? Like, was he holding out for somewhere else? What's the deal there?
I'm not entirely, because it's kind of a unique one in that when I checked actually March last year, I realised that he was born in Martinique, which is quite unique because Martinique historically have used players from mainland France, with heritage. But he was born in Martinique and he moved to France when he was younger. And I wouldn't say he's in the twilight of his career, but at 29, he's not exactly up and coming.
Right.
This is just a theory. He is a player that you could kind of put in the maverick category. So he's a little bit of a free spirit at times, Stephen Langille. So he joined Legia Warsaw in Poland last summer, and he played like 5 or 6 times. He barely got on the pitch, and there was a picture that emerged online of him with smoking when he was at Legia, and with alcohol, a lot of alcohol on the table.
Okay.
And Legia basically saw it and were like, sorry, we don't want you at the club anymore. So he actually went back on loan to the Belgian club that he joined from.
Right.
So that might be that might play a factor that that he's probably not somebody that's like a opposite of Phil Neville, basically.
The anti-Phil Neville.
Yeah. So no, he made a great impact against Nicaragua, and an amazing goal. Just the spatial awareness and the skill and the finish. He might well start now against the US based on that. I was a little bit surprised he didn't start, because he scored 4 goals in qualifying. He was a big player in qualifying, and as I say, scored the second goal against Trinidad and Tobago, and he's very quick. The only negative to his game is sometimes his decision making can be quite poor in the final third. He's, as I say, he's got lots of pace, but he can just make the wrong decisions sometimes, and his end product can kind of be missing. But he's certainly a key player for them going forward if he starts or off the bench. So is Kevin Parsmain. Another player of note for Martinique is Jordi Delem, who plays for the Seattle Sounders. So he's quite a versatile player, nominally kind of a defensive holding player. But he for Martinique and for his club.
Seattle fans will disagree, right? They'll say he's a right back. That's where I keep seeing him play.
Yeah. I mean, he has been playing there. So Jobin Jones, Trinidad and Tobago international at left back for Seattle, and then Jordi Delem at right back. From what I've read online, he's kind of he's had a mixed bag so far. Some games he's impressed in, others not so much. But for Martinique, he's had to step in and deputise at centre half. Alongside the captain, Sébastien Crétin-Noir, because Jean-Sylvain Babin, who plays for Granada in La Liga, so decent level.
Yeah.
He has not been released by his club, Granada. He wasn't released for the Caribbean Cup. He wasn't released for the Gold Cup.
But isn't this a FIFA or a sort of proper tournament? So aren't they obligated to release players? Because this would be like not releasing someone for the Euros, right?
That's the thing, but because, as I mentioned earlier, because Martinique are not affiliated to FIFA, this creates problems for them because it seems as if the clubs are actually under no obligation to release their players. And the same applies for their neighbours, Guadeloupe. The same applies for French Guiana. So Jamaica, the manager, he constantly, he's been complaining about this a lot, and it creates issues because Martinique want to call up a player from Europe, but some clubs will let them go, some clubs won't. Obviously, the US, for example, wouldn't have this. If the US want to call up, Zardes or Pulisic, whoever it is, then they can do that. Any nation that's affiliated to FIFA, when a tournament rolls around, the clubs have to let them go.
So this is to do with the sort of unique situation of these countries.
Yeah, that's right, and it's tricky because some players have missed out for Martinique. So Jean-Sylvain Babin, as I say, is not there at centre back. Julien Faubert, who you might remember from West Ham and Real Madrid, who's an international for Martinique, he's not there because his club in Finland have decided not to let him go. Dominique Pandor from Bastia in France, he's not there.
Wow, so it's like the US and Mexico are sending their B teams for experimentation, and Martinique is sending something of a B team because of the clubs not letting players go.
Yeah, I mean they've been able to include some of their European and overseas based players. So Johan Arquin is in there, Stephen Langille, who we talked about earlier, Johan Aldell. So they've got some overseas experience, but it's quite domestic heavy. And you could say that it gives these domestic-based players a chance to showcase what they've got on a bigger platform, which is good. But Martinique they try to find and identify players in France, you see, that are playing in the French lower divisions that are eligible to play for Martinique, and there are a number that were listed on the preliminary squad. So I don't know if you remember Catherine Theophile.
I don't.
Who played for Cardiff City. So, he was on the 40-man preliminary squad. He would have been a good addition, but, wasn't included. So, it's a unique situation. And it's kind of quite political because Martinique, it is an extension of France, basically. It's, my first visit last month, it is basically France, but in the Caribbean. The culture is very similar. The language is the same. So it's, it's a difficult one, really.
Can we talk about their tactics for this game against the US? Because looking at the group, they're top of the group right now because of that win over Nicaragua. And I'm going to assume that because the other opponents are US and Panama, that was the game that they would have thought, okay, we win that game, it's 3 points, and we can maybe get third place. Is that pretty much what we're looking at? Exactly.
Because it's a tough group, and it's a group really that you're looking at and you're thinking, right? Well, the US, even with a second string team, they're going to be favourites, aren't they, to go through? And likewise, Panama are certainly no pushovers in CONCACAF. So those two are expected to take the top two spots, and then Martinique, that's the good thing about the Gold Cup for some nations, in that it gives the two best third place teams, that chance to make it to the quarterfinals. So
were
that
they
win.
Disappointed with not running up the score more against Nicaragua, or was 2-0 sort of good? Because you've got to be in the top two third place teams, right? So it means they'll be watching the other two tables, I assume, and the goal difference and the points of those other two teams. So was 2-0 against Nicaragua good enough?
We'll have to wait. I mean, it's kind of impossible to say at the moment. I think they would have preferred to have a bit more of a cushion, and they had chances. They had chances in that game to make it 3 or 4 even. But I think 2-0 is a decent result for them. Nicaragua are one of the weaker teams within Central America, so I think they did well to beat them, but certainly the bigger tests now will come against the States on Wednesday and then Panama finally on Saturday. The tactics, they're quite a direct, athletic team, and because they've got players recruited from France that were brought up in the French system, they can play as well. I think against the US, you're going to have to be realistic, and they're not going to have the lion's share of possession, are they? That's obvious. Right. The US are going to have more possession. But one thing in their favour for Martinique is that they do have speed going forward.
Yeah,
and they can hit teams, on the counter.
I'm picturing a nightmare scenario for the US where Martinique pack everybody back, and then Stephen Langille, who, for US fans, he'll be wearing number 10, right? with those weird numbers that go really high up the back on Martinique players. I noticed. But if he bursts forward and the US gets caught too far up the field, he's easily faster than anybody on that US team. I'm thinking, for US fans listening, I'm thinking he's like DeAndre Yedlin, but faster in terms of speed.
It'd be a good race.
It would,
be an exciting one. But Langille, his speed and like he showed against Nicaragua. And on the wings, they started with Johan Arquin on the right, who's not too fast, but he's more of a centre forward really. And then they had Johan Ordell on the left, Kevin Parsmain. So Johnny Marijo as well is a player on the bench who could come on. He's pretty quick. Plays in Martinique, Johnny Marijo. So he looked good in the Caribbean Cup. So yeah, I think that would be the game plan as far as Martinique are concerned. They're not going to go out and play the ball around and dominate the US. I mean, it's pretty much a David against Goliath, isn't it? And they played Panama actually in 2013. And lost 1-0, but they gave a decent account of themselves.
Did they sit back or did they open themselves up?
I think it depends on the opposition. I mean, in qualifying for the Caribbean Cup, they definitely expressed themselves and went forward. And actually, they were tight defensively in the Caribbean Cup qualifying because they conceded the least amount of goals. They only conceded two goals. So. The US, that this is a different caliber of opposition, right. And that's what you want to be. You want to be playing the top teams for development. No disrespect to Dominica and the Dominican Republic and the British Virgin Islands, who they played in qualifying, but you want to be playing the top teams. So having the chance, yes, it's not a full strength USA team, but having the chance to play them, in bigger stadiums. Particularly for domestic-based players, it's a great learning curve for them. But yeah, from a tactical point of view, I think I'd expect them to sit back a little bit more, perhaps. And now they've got the 3 points under their belt. If they can get through to the quarters, they've got to count that as a success.
Outside of Martinique and French Guiana, we already talked about. Are there any other sort of big Caribbean football stories at this Gold Cup?
Malouda is obviously a big one.
Yeah.
Jamaica coming into it having not defended their Caribbean Cup title.
Yeah,
what has
happened to Jamaica?
Well, various things. I mean, you'll remember that they beat the US, so I had to get that in there. They beat the US in the semis in 2015 and became the first Caribbean island to reach the Gold Cup final. And quite a lot of stuff has changed in 2 years for them. They've got a new coach, Theodore Whitmore, who's in his fourth stint at the helm now, and they've got a newly assembled team. So they didn't use any of the UK-born players for the Gold Cup.
Interesting.
So you'll see that Wes Morgan's not in there, Adrian Mariappa's not in there, Gareth McCleary, Michael Hector, Simon Dawkins, Joby McAnuff. So it's a different team. And they were beaten deservedly, actually, in the final of the Caribbean Cup. However, they did get a good result, actually, a good 2-0 win against Curacao in what was quite a poor game last night. It was quite a poor spectacle.
I didn't watch, but I did see some complaints on Twitter from people who did.
Yeah, I think I did as well, actually. I mean, it was quite poor. The ball was getting turned over a lot. I mean, it was a bit scrappy at times. I expected a little bit more from Curacao, really, but yeah, Jamaica got their revenge. So I suppose them coming into it not winning the Caribbean Cup was a bit of a story. And Curacao were kind of like the Caribbean's new kid on the block.
Okay.
I mean, the tiny island off the coast of Venezuela, down south in the Caribbean, 160,000 population. What's helped them is two things. Patrick Kluivert came in early 2015 to manage them and really, really helped just take things up a notch, and also they similar to Martinique is a French overseas department. Curacao is like they're sort of controlled by the Netherlands. It's quite political, but like they're like an extension of the Netherlands, but in the Caribbean. And this meant that they could call upon quite a few players born in the Netherlands that wanted to play for Curacao. So Leandro Bacuna plays for them, Cuco Martina, Eloy Room, Rangelo Janga. So yeah, I mean, the four Caribbean nations at this Gold Cup. If you look at them, analyse them, I think at the moment Martinique and Jamaica obviously have the kind of the lead. I wouldn't rule out Curacao just yet, and French Guiana, they kind of needed to get points, I think, against Canada if they were to clinch one of the best third place teams, because they're going to play Honduras next, and then Costa Rica, and those two teams are formidable at CONCACAF level. So yeah, I'm looking really at Jamaica and Martinique and potentially Curacao at the moment.
All right, and finally, how are you enjoying your Gold Cup experience here in the US?
Yeah, it's been good. It's my first Gold Cup. So it's been interesting. I mean, just being in the press bit and comparing it to the Caribbean Cup, it's very, very different.
Right.
Caribbean Cup, you just kind of walked in and a bit more laid back. But yeah, it's been good. I noticed the kind of the crowds get bigger for the bigger games. So on Friday, you know, there weren't a great amount of people for Canada, French Guiana, but there were a lot more for Honduras, Costa Rica. I dream of one day the tournament being held in the Caribbean. You never know. Like a combined Caribbean event, like in the Bahamas or Jamaica or the Cayman Islands or somewhere like that. You know, it could be done in the future. But for now, I understand why the US are perennially hosts, because of obviously financial reasons for CONCACAF. But it's been good, and as I say, I'll be at the Raymond James on Wednesday, and then finish off at the Alamo Dome on Sunday. So yeah, really good fun, and I just hope that at least one Caribbean representative can make it into the knockout phases.
All right. Well, let's hope it's Martinique, but let's hope they don't beat the US in doing so. So, Nathan, one final time, can you remind people where to find your writing and your podcasting?
Yeah, definitely. So my blog is www.thehomeofcaribbeanfootball.com. The podcast that I co-host is Caribbean Football Weekly. We are on iTunes, and we're also on SoundCloud. I'm on Twitter at Caribbean Football abbreviated to FTBL. And also you can find me on Facebook and Instagram. So yeah, please do get in touch. Check out some of the stuff. There's quite a few articles up on my blog that I've done from time to time. So I'll be looking to kind of cover the Gold Cup as much as possible. But thanks again, Dale, for having me on the show, and I hope that Martinique can give a good account of themselves against the States.
All right, Nathan, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
So there you go. That was Nathan Carr, and the US plays Martinique this Wednesday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern kickoff, or at least that's what US Soccer says. You know, it may be 20 minutes later, but 9 p.m. Eastern on Fox Sports 1, and the game is in Tampa at Raymond James Stadium. My one quick thought about the US lineup for this game that maybe Taylor and I didn't get into on the Panama review show is that it seems to me there's a good possibility the US doesn't stick with that 4-2-3-1 formation, because from what we've seen from Bruce Arena in the past, when he wants to go after a team, he's willing to go a bit bigger and maybe go two up front. So I'm thinking you may see Dom Dwyer start with Juan Agudelo alongside him, or Dom Dwyer with Jordan Morris alongside him. And, of course, when you add a forward, you kind of have to lose a midfielder. So either Joe Corona or Dax McCarty or Kellyn Acosta is going to miss out. My guess is that maybe it's either Acosta or McCarty plays as a sort of slightly deeper player with Joe Corona just ahead of them. Or maybe even Kellen Rowe comes in the middle, plays that attacking midfield role. But let's call it like a 4-4-2 or maybe more like a 4-1-3-2 is what we see against Martinique. Whatever happens, Taylor and I will be watching Wednesday evening, and we'll have a review show out for you soon afterwards. All right, so best of luck to Martinique, but go USA.